Okay, now that we have a minion, I wanted to get started. So we've heard nonstop from Republicans this Congress about their supposed unyielding support for Israel and commitment to the fight against rising anti-Semitism around the world and here at home, and how about Democrats are anti-Semitic, supposedly, and anti-Israel. Well, the supposed CR that just disgraced the House floor cleared all of that up for us. The vast majority of House Republicans just voted to kneecap foreign military financing and energy security cooperation funding for Israel, our most critical ally. This group that voted to cut Israel aid by $1 billion, with a B, includes almost every self-described moderate Republican in this chamber. Just a few weeks ago, all of them voted for a resolution pledging their devotion to the U.S.-Israel relationship. That devotion evaporated into thin air at the first test. Speaker McCarthy himself traveled to Israel earlier this year and took an oath on the floor of the Knesset that he would provide Israel the resources it needs to defend itself. That promise has gone about as well as all of his other promises, it seems. Moreover, they're all but ensuring that we fall short of our commitments to key regional partners who help guarantee Israel's continued security and safeguard our interests in the Middle East and North Africa. This comes at a time when Iran is flagrantly violating international law by financing terror groups like Hezbollah and Hamas and enriching uranium to near weapons grade. All this is paid for by the sale of oil in violation of sanctions. How is our State Department supposed to enforce consequences for Iran after losing a third of its resources and personnel? Israel is not just fighting for itself. Israel is on the front lines of the terror threat, the nuclear threat of annihilation coming from Iran. We need Israel's partnership just as much as they need ours. I have to ask, how can anyone trust Republicans to hold up our side of the bargain when they put a $1 billion cut to Israel's aid on the floor and the overwhelming majority of Republicans voted yes? How will it reflect on our nation if we're unable to live up to our promises to our closest allies? President Biden has worked tirelessly to enhance Israel's security and expand the Abraham Accords, but all these efforts would be cut off by the GOP's reckless shutdown games. If anything, Israel needs more from us, not less. We cannot afford to make Israel a partisan issue. This failed CR wasn't even radical enough to unify the MAGA majority. It's just a taste of the damage that will be done to Israel's security and our bilateral relationship if Republicans succeed in their goal of slashing government funding. With anti-Semitism surpassing record rates in the United States and around the globe, the Jewish community is under siege. We need 30% more funding going towards Holocaust education, combating anti-Semitic discrimination on college campuses, and the FBI's critical work to prevent hate crimes and domestic terror attacks before they happen. Not 30% less, which 90% of House Republicans just enthusiastically endorsed. This year, the Biden administration released our nation's first ever national strategy to combat anti-Semitism, which was greeted with bipartisan support and praise. In order to accomplish the ambitious goals to combat the world's most ancient hatred, we need more resources, not less. In government, like anything else, you get what you pay for. The American people will not accept bargain basement solutions to these pressing issues that are so close to our communities. Along with other Democratic members here today who share my dedication to Israel's sovereignty and future as a Jewish democratic state, as well as the battle against anti-Jewish hate in our own country, we will not stand idly by while the GOP unravels the progress we've made towards these urgent objectives. We will call out every Republican member who has backed off the promises they've made to the American Jewish community and their constituents in exchange for whatever interim Speaker McCarthy promised them. Thank you. And now I would like to call upon my colleague Brad Schneider, and we can kick it off from there.
It's easier to do this. Thank you. And Debbie, thank you. And I want to thank all my colleagues coming together. What we saw today was nothing short of disgraceful. Start with the fact that the Republicans put on the floor a continuing resolution that would cut funding across the board by almost 30%. Former Speaker Pelosi, Speaker Emerita Pelosi says, "Show me your budget. I'll show you. I'll tell you your priorities." We saw that clearly from the Republicans today. Now, within that 30% cut, they carved out and protected certain things. So we also know by what they didn't protect, what's not important to them. And one of the things that was on the floor today to be cut was defense security, defense funding for Israel, our ally, our most important ally in the Middle East, one of our most important allies in the world. They could have cut it out. They could have protected that. They chose not to. We are standing here saying that Israel's security is, without question, United States security. We stand shoulder to shoulder without any daylight with our ally Israel. And that's why it's so important that we continue to partner with our ally. We continue to make sure they have the resources to secure their borders, to defend their nations, and to work closely with our country. The Republicans today, 90% of the Republican caucus voted to cut Israel's funding. The other 10% voted not against that, but said we need to cut funding even further. We're standing today saying we will stand with Israel, stand united with Israel, and protect its security. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm glad to be here as co-chair of the Latino Jewish Caucus. And of course, the Republican wrecking crew not only cut funds for families, children who are benefiting from the only surviving program from the 60s, Head Start. They're cutting police officers, so when your response time it's affected because of these cuts, you know where to look. They're doing all of these things locally, but of course, Israel could not be spared either. And so here we are. We try to help Israel because they continue to be in the trenches for America and the world as we face a global threat from Iran, who continues to fund Hezbollah, and Hamas, who continues to beat up on women. So when we do that, we aid and abet Iran. We hurt the thousands upon thousands of people, mainly women, that are in the streets of Iran fighting for justice right now. That's what happens when we cut funding to Israel. And so we're here to denounce that, to say that this is a CR that's a wrecking crew for not just American families, but for civility around the world. And I'm here to support my Jewish brothers and sisters. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lois Frankel from Florida. Well, let me just say this, it's been said before, but Israel is our best friend and ally in a very perilous region of the world. Her security is our security. And the latest funding, I'll say outrageous funding proposal of the extreme MAGA Republicans cuts $1 billion from our commitment to Israel's security at a time that Israel faces threats on her northern border and from Iran and its proxies, and now the new threat, the extreme Republicans in this Congress.
I'm Kathy Manning from North Carolina's 6th District. What we have seen in the CR today is absolutely appalling. What we saw is that Speaker McCarthy is being held hostage by his extreme MAGA Republicans. And we've all spoken earlier about the devastating cuts that would hurt Americans all across our country. But what we haven't spoken about until this hearing, this meeting right here, is what these cuts would do to our national security. We're living in a time when democracies are under assault all around the world, and the safety and security of Israel benefits the safety and security of the United States. The cuts we saw in the CR would be dramatic cuts to Israel. It would also be dramatic cuts to Ukraine, dramatic cuts to our European allies who are so critical to standing against Putin in his assault on Ukraine, dramatic cuts to our allies in Asia. So I think it's important for us to highlight that the Republicans like to talk a long game about being pro-security, pro-national security, but what we've seen in this CR is that they're willing to cave to the extremist MAGA Republicans and give in on issues that supposedly they are supposed to be so strongly in support of. So I'm glad to be here with my allies in the Democratic Party and just point out something that all Americans should be aware of, and that is that the Republicans are not standing for our national security.
Congressman Phillips.
Thank you. Thanks, Kathy. Dean Phillips from Minnesota's 3rd District. I'm confused. I'm really confused. Our Republican colleagues talk all the time about their profound support for our men and women in uniform, our military. And yet they're walking us into a shutdown in which our military will not be paid. And I'm confused because even our GOP colleagues talk about the need for a significant social safety net for the most vulnerable in America. And yet they're cutting 30% from just about every single program that benefits the most vulnerable in our country. And I'm confused because our colleagues on the other side of the aisle talk so regularly about their profound love and support for Israel, unwavering support. And they're cutting $1 billion in aid based on their proposition. So I'm confused because either it is an egregious mistake or it's intentional. And I would simply ask those of you here covering this press conference to ask them. If it's a mistake, my goodness, we can resolve it right now. We can go right back in that room, pass a CR, put away this nonsense, and get back to work and actually fund the programs that are important to this entire country and to our most important ally. But if it's not a mistake, it's intentional. And I would ask all of you who have pursued careers in journalism to make sure the country understands that ridiculous, offensive, and appalling hypocrisy. Thank you.
Thanks, Dean. Jake Auchincloss, Massachusetts 4th. Israel is our most important ally in the Middle East. And at a time when Iran is increasingly belligerent in destabilizing an already dangerous neighborhood and in sending arms and support to autocrats the world over, this billion-dollar cut in Israel's security threatens to undermine the stability and security of Israel and its wider neighborhood. I want the American Jewish community to remember this the next time that Republicans claim that they are the party that supports Israel. In failing to govern our own democracy, they are undermining one of our closest allied democracies in the world.
Thank you, Jared Moskowitz from Florida's 23rd. Thank you, Debbie, for putting this together. I want to thank all my colleagues for being here. You know, at a time in which the Middle East is at a potential turning point with expanding the Abraham Accords and potentially working out a deal with Saudi Arabia, my colleagues across the aisle thought now is the time to defund resources to that region. At a time when Iran is expanding their geopolitical influence in the region and their geographic footprint in the region, my Republican MAGA extreme colleagues across the aisle thought now is the time to defund critical aid to our #1 ally in that region, in the state of Israel. And so, listen, yesterday they had a disastrous oversight hearing, and this oversight on what they just passed for the state of Israel is a disaster for our foreign policy. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Greg Landsman, Ohio 1. This is an unprecedented moment. We've had government shutdowns before, but this one is unprecedented. It's unprecedented because we already passed a bipartisan budget agreement. It passed the House, it passed the Senate, the President signed it into law. That's never happened. Going back on a budget agreement. This budget that they tried to pass today, and it was a budget, a CR doesn't have cuts. Right? A CR continues the funding from the previous year. This is the first time a budget has cut aid to Israel. That is unprecedented. And it is unprecedented that a small group of people have taken over all aspects of what happens on the House of Representatives. Matt Gaetz and these far right extremists have taken over. And what we just saw was one of the most dangerous pieces of legislation. It went down. It wasn't dangerous enough for these extremists, but it went down, and we're only going to get through this moment and get back to normalcy when the leadership on the other side decides that they are done dealing with Matt Gaetz. They are done dealing with these extremists. Otherwise, this is going to continue to happen, and it puts this country into a very dangerous place. And so I am, as my colleagues are, fully committed to doing the hard work over the next couple of days to work with the Senate, the Republicans and Democrats in the Senate, and the vast majority of members to get a deal done to either keep the government open or make sure the shutdown is short-lived. But no way will we allow this attempt to cut aid to Israel to stand.
Thank you. I think the bottom line summary here is that Republican promises aren't worth a bucket of spit. Anytime in the future that you hear an extreme MAGA Republican in the House of Representatives profess their undying devotion to the U.S.-Israel relationship and to protecting and serving as guardians of Israel remaining a Jewish and democratic state, you should remember that 90% of these jokers voted to support a $1 billion cut to foreign aid to Israel. You know what? A few months ago, they also said that they also agreed to an agreement with the White House, the Senate, and the House, the majority of the House of Representatives, on a debt ceiling deal so we could avoid crashing our economy into a cliff. They broke that promise in less than a week. So don't believe a word that comes out of an extreme MAGA Republican mouth. That's what we're here to tell you, and we're happy to answer any questions. I don't know. Come a little closer, Mark.
It seems like we're headed to a shutdown of some length at this point, which obviously involves furloughs, involves staffing cuts, involves people not getting paid across the federal government. What is that going to look like? What are the impacts of that going to be for some of the major initiatives that we have going on in the Middle East, whether that be negotiations with Saudi Arabia, the anti-Semitism office? Do you have any idea what that might entail?
Well, I mean, one of the things, that CR would have had a 30% cut across the board, you know, except for the few things that they protected. That 30% cut means that if you are deeply cutting the State Department, how are they going to have the personnel in place coming to work every day to make sure that we can, you know, stand up for our agreements, you know, make sure that we can be there for our allies? I mean, the Abraham Accords, the concerns that we have around the entire world, you know, with a 30% cut, that is going to completely disable our ability to be there for our allies. And actually, Congresswoman Frankel serves on the State Foreign Operations Appropriations Subcommittee, and she can probably add further to that. If you want to.
That guy's got this.
I don't need to put you on the spot. But
No, I'm just saying that this.
I have to get this a little bit closer so we can hear. All I hear is Scooby-Doo.
Maybe I think he's riding off.
Jesus was right. Oh shit. Remember when Jesus was right?
I have a question.
Oh my. I'm sorry, that was a little crazy. Oh.
The cuts or a potential shutdown?
Well, I think I'll be repeating what Debbie said, but really, I mean, every agency in government right now, their preoccupation now is getting ready for a shutdown. So they're not even, they're not even focused on this work. They're focused on who can actually work, who is essential. And I don't know who they're declaring to be essential. There'll be a lot of workers who will not be declared essential. They're going to be out. They're not going to get paid. And so I think that you're looking at government as a whole being stalled.
Mark, I'll add to it.
Here you go.
You know, some of us were in Israel in August. We were at the Lebanon border where the Hezbollah dug a tunnel. We were at the Syrian border where Iran is active. There are so many threats Israel faces at this moment across the region. And the U.S.-Israel collaboration and our support for Israel's security is imperative. This is but one example as the government is moving headlong to a Republican shutdown, a House Republican shutdown. What it means is that all the things we do in the normal course of business is going to become increasingly difficult and in some cases potentially impossible. And then you lay on that, had the CR of the Republicans put on the floor today gone through, it would have cut funding even further, taking $1 billion out of the need for Israel's security. So thankfully it failed. We stood strong. We will continue to stand strong. but the government shutdown is a threat, not just to Israel's security and the U.S.-Israel relationship, but U.S. security around the world. And so many people here at home, small businesses, people depending on Social Security, getting their health care through the VA, every one of those people is going to be affected by this shutdown.
So, I'm the ranking member of the Middle East Subcommittee, and there are a couple of really intensely important short-term challenges, one of which is we can't travel. We can't travel to the various regions of the world where we are supposed to conduct our business, meet our colleagues from around the world, and do what this country needs more than ever, which is diplomacy. Cutting the State Department budget by 30% means that their priority is bombs and bullets, but not diplomacy. This is worth noting, as Congressman Sherman just noted, that a budget is an expression of principles. These are realities. If the shutdown is only a few days, it's one thing. If it goes on weeks, even longer, it really compromises our ability to be leaders in the world. And once again, a shameful stain on the United States of America that is utterly preventable. Plain and simple. Plain and simple.
I have a question. How is this going to affect the troops that are serving Operation Inherent Resolve? Are they not going to get paid while they're over there fighting? Because they're fighting ISIS right now.
If the government shuts down, the troops don't get paid.
My understanding is both reservists and active duty military personnel, my understanding is, will not get paid if there's a shutdown. Period. Period. Doesn't matter where they are, even if they are literally taking fire from enemies abroad.
Even though they get housing and they can get families.
Yeah, it's awful. Yet compelled to still serve, which is
exactly
shameful.
How will this affect the actual MENA Middle East region?
Well, we're not going to have resources to do anything, to conduct our business, to have our hearings. I entered Congress in 2019 as a freshman in a shutdown. Nothing happened. Thought it was the easiest job I'd ever had in my entire life because nothing was happening.
For a month.
For a month, exactly. And to answer your question very directly, nothing will happen. And what happens when nothing happens here? Our adversaries fill that vacuum. And mark my words, our adversaries are ready to fill that vacuum at one of the most consequential times in history, particularly in the region about which we're speaking.
Let me add one other thing. What we saw in the prior administration was an administration who destroyed our relationships with our allies and called up to our enemies. And this administration, President Biden, has worked so hard to rebuild our relationship with our allies, to rebuild and strengthen NATO, and to strengthen our relationship with our allies all across the eastern part of the world. And this administration has been very successful. The Republicans like to talk about the threat posed by China, and yet when push comes to shove, they're willing to cut funding to all the allies that we have worked so hard to build up our relations, rebuild our relationship with. So what we see them willing to bend to in their extremists, I think we ought to expect that that's what we will see in the future if they are successful going down the road.
We need to pass a clean CR. That's the bottom line. We need to make sure, like we usually do when we try to make sure we can keep government open, that we don't put any extraneous culture war riders on it, that we don't have devastating cuts as a part of it. That's not a CR. A continuing resolution is called a continuing resolution because it just pushes forward the funding from the current fiscal year so that we can make sure we continue the negotiations for the next fiscal year. These extreme MAGA Republicans are so hell-bent on devastating cuts that they're willing to make them in a CR, jeopardize not only a government shutdown, but our commitments to our allies like Israel around the world. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for what you all do.
Thanks, you guys.
Thank you. Thanks for pulling, hey, Debbie, thanks for pulling this together.
No, you're welcome. Thank you for coming.